So welcome to the Crafty Online Conference, April 2022. Today's talk is the outlook for 2022. And I'm joined today by some fabulous folk. I will give everybody the opportunity to introduce themselves. I'm just going to go around the room as I can see it on my screen. If I could start off with you, Neil.
Hello, I'm Neil Ridley. I'm a drinks writer, presenter, and general enjoyer of spirits, really. My room here is, I wish I could show you actually, but it is packed with miniature sample bottles at the moment, which I need to get through. So yes, that's what I do.
Okay, lovely. And yourself, David?
Hello, David T. Smith. I'm one of the founders of the Craft Distilling Expo and the Crafty Online Conference, but in addition to that, I'm a writer, judge, consultant on distilling for gins, vodkas, liqueurs, all those kind of interesting things, and a great supporter of new distillery.
Lovely, thank you. And yourself, Millie?
Hello, I'm Millie Milliken. I am a drinks journalist. I cover kind of on and off trade, so writing about spirits, cocktails, bars, and the wonderful people that make all the wonderful drinks. I'm a judge as well for numerous competitions, and yeah, just a general bar proper-upper in my spare time and my professional time as well, to be honest.
Fantastic, thank you. And finally, yourself, Billy.
Yeah, I'm Billy Abbott. I am, again, a drinks writer and presenter and things. I also do training and IWSC Educator for spirits. I am learning about wine and all that sort of thing as well. I'm a constant learner of things about booze, basically, and occasionally people ask me to talk about them as well. But by day, I work for the Whisky Exchange, which is a big shop, which you may have heard of, and as a writer, educator, all that sort of thing there. And we sell pretty much anything that anybody wants when it comes to the loveliness of booze.
Lovely, thank you so much. And I am just going to quickly acknowledge the fact we were all wearing hats at the start. So I'm going to remove mine now because I realise it may look slightly unprofessional to wear a skunk hat during this discussion. So moving on very quickly, before we before we project into 2020, I also need to acknowledge, we are partway through the year, but that is the timing of this talk. So I thought it would be nice to get a little point from each person and what they've acknowledged just in the last few months in particular. So I'm just going to chuck that out there to David to start with you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's April. We are partway through. It's the end of April, in fact. So, but I think now things are actually starting to get going again. I think this is probably the point where we're starting to get more international travel back, more things are opening up, and actually, and long may it continue, and may it continue in this direction. In terms of trends that I've seen recently-ish, and partly from a recent trip to America, would be these sort of botanical spirits. So not gin, not vodka as such, because they're a lower ABV. So they're about 30%, partly hooked into a trend towards lower ABV products, or possibly lower calorific products as well, because they tend to not have much sugar or anything in them. So it's things like, there's some Grey Goose products, and Belvedere do some as well. And they are essentially, a bit like a gin, but rather than being with juniper, they're distilled with other botanicals, sometimes with some essences as well, and at a lower ABV. They might be 20, 30%, but certainly the Grey Goose ones have seen a very big push in duty free and online and all over the place. So I think it'll be interesting to see in the summer whether that translates and whether people are actually interested in these sorts of products. Very much just the spirit and some sort of mixer is really where you're going for nice, simple, easy drinking, both in bars and also at home.
Lovely, thank you. And who should we jump to next, Millie?
Yeah, I'm going to just pick up on what David was mentioning about the kind of lower ABV spirits that are coming out. There's this kind of range that I think people are starting to call light spirits that are kind of between the 10 and 20% ABV mark. And a lot of them are obviously kind of channeling gin as a kind of access point for consumers. But some of them are really interesting. You've got things like Solasa, which has been created to pair with Indian food, and the founder of that's got a really interesting backstory, and the liquid is delicious as well. And got things like quarter, which is, you know, quarter strength, 20 light spirits, which is 20%, and other things like table spirits as well. Aldermas Spirits launched that, I think, last year, but I think people, the way they're drinking is changing as well. So having that lighter spirit option rather than maybe going for a bottle of wine is something that I think we're going to see a bit more of as well, which is really exciting. So yeah, I mean, whatever you kind of, your stances on sort of no and low, I think this light ABV is, for a consumer, it's really exciting. It means that you can kind of really enjoy those drinks and they've still got that flavour. And yeah, they're quite fun to play around with as well in cocktails. So yeah, I think we're probably going to see a few more of those launching soon as well, because there's been a couple, I think even in the last week, I think MasterChef finalists launched one. So yeah, more of that to come, I think.
Fantastic, thanks ever so much. And did you have anything to add, Neil, or did you want to bring a different point?
Yeah, interestingly, I think from the perspective that we've been talking about just now, actually, this idea of sort of low and no or lower, in terms of sort of on trade and off trade, actually, the drinks I've been seeing have all been smaller drinks. So this idea of making a smaller martini or a smaller Negroni, and not quite as sort of outrageously priced as well. I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing is moderation in drinking, obviously from the sort of spirits Millie was mentioning and David, but then also from the sort of element of consumption as well, and making just better drinks, but smaller ones. And I think you'll start to see a bit more of this across the industry, maybe little cocktail flights, maybe smaller serves, just really good quality ones as well. And then of course, drinks at home, just fewer ingredients, just really good quality, simple cocktails that you can make with home ingredients. Another thing I've been looking at a lot is sort of, I guess, regional spirits. So there's a great distillery, Cocktials, down in the Cotswolds. Is it Cotswolds, Millie? I mean, it's an unbelievable place, and just really excellent sort of focus on local fruit, local produce, and this idea that actually making things on a much smaller scale is, you know, you may never get to try some of these, but they're worth seeking out. And I think there's a general trend across the business. This idea of localism is so much more important at the moment. I think the lockdowns really taught us how to appreciate our locality a lot more than we ever did before.
Yeah, sure, that's a very good point. And Billy, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, well, we just lost little strands everybody else has said, really. You know, from the retail side, we've seen the sort of things people ask us about, the things people ask us to let them find out is quite interesting. You know, at the moment, we're in the process of launching a load of stuff, digging into the sustainability aspects of products, which is a big thing across everything. I think as of today, it might even be the official launch day as we record. Or be able to filter across our site, not everything yet, we're still building the big lists of what is what, be able to filter on sustainability credentials of spirits, so you can dive in and see things which are made by B Corps, things which are sustainably grown and all that sort of thing. But it's all about what people are asking us. They're asking us about that. They're asking us about things about location and locality. You know, if we get the country wrong on something, we know very, very quickly. You know, we're adding hundreds of spirits a month, and you know, you get little things like that wrong. People want to know where they're from, and they want to be able to sort of like attach, you know, provenance to everything. So seeing a lot of interest in how things are made, where they're made, what they're made from, and that ties especially to things like the guys at Cocktials. You know, Barney is one of the most ridiculous perfectionists of making spirits I've ever met. I'm going to an event this afternoon where I'm very hoping he'll be there, so I can do my sort of like my yearly, yes, I will come and visit sometime soon, I'm so sorry. Because again, it's seeing people like that create these spirits, which you know, a lot of consumers are really interested in, that care, attention, and as Neil was saying, trying to have smaller numbers of ingredients, but the right ingredients to make really great drinks. And so, yeah, over the past year, you know, things we've launched through the website, we've done a lot of work on low and no, giving people options and alternatives to take drinks, and then step down from a full strength thing down to a no alcohol thing with steps in between and different ideas. And, you know, as I say, location, everything, everything everybody's been saying, we've been seeing on the retail side as well, with consumers really wanting to know more about those things. And hopefully us and other retailers in give people the chance to actually find that information out.
Brilliant, thank you. I love the fact that people are becoming more interested in locality and the process of making the spirit, because it's really giving that opportunity for those smaller distillers to be discovered. Like, more people are interested in seeking them out, which is wonderful. We're going to move on to the next section now. So RTSs, ready to serve. So you may be familiar with the term ready to drink, and that's kind of evolved recently into ready to serve, which are kind of being distinguished as a separate category. I know you've got something to say on this, David.
Yeah, so a very quick definition, I guess, just to help. So RTD, ready to drink, is something, and this is not a legally defined category, but this is just a sort of convention of terminology, is something basically that you're drinking from the container that it's in. So think gin and tonic, nice and cold from the fridge, from the chiller, really, isn't it? On the train, crack it open, jobs are good and all. As Bernie and I are very fond of the pina colada from Marks and Spencer. It's very good, whatever that might be. But you're drinking it from the can. You're not like, oh, let me get my fine crystal cut glass, you know, goblet out. And then you've got something like RTS, which is ready to serve, which means that there's some aspect in addition that you need to do, and it might be adding ice. So, like, an example would be something like this, which is the Star Wars, their whiskey Negroni. You're not going to, you could, but you're probably, and it's 32%, you're not going to be swigging this out of the bottle, you know. I mean, you could stick it in the freezer and just pour it straight, that'd be very nice, but you're not going to be drinking it out of the bottle. You've got to put something with it, maybe stir it down with ice, or maybe just add some ice. And this is kind of this difference between the ready to drink and the ready to serve. And the ready to serve, I mean, it used to be known as bottled cocktails, and this is not a new thing by any stretch of the imagination. You know, bartenders were doing it, I think maybe at least back into the 20s or something like that in the US. There's some interesting stories as to how that all started, but anyway, it's not a history lesson. But people like Gordon's and that were doing, you know, martinis and that up until the, you know, starting in the 30s, up until maybe the 90s. I mean, I've certainly seen some miniatures of Gordon's martinis knocking around and have tasted them, and they're not. You've had one as well, haven't you, Neil? So they're not bad at all. Which I got from the Whisky Exchange, Billy. So they.
Circle of life.
There you go. Yeah, so I think we'll start to see as these as the whole category of growing this sort of convenience drinking, we'll start to see a sort of a split between the two. One of the big areas I've seen growing is Negronis, partly because as they go, Negronis are one of the easier products to pre-batch. Certainly when you come to like cans and stuff, that can be very difficult. Do check out our RTD session on it, because you'll find out just how difficult it is. But yeah, Negroni is one of the easier ones. Campari have got one, but there's a lot of different ones going on, and there's going to be a lot more released this year, which says to me that it's time for tasting. But there we go.
Definitely.
Always time for tasting. Lovely. I think you wanted to add something to this, Millie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting when David did the sort of separation between what the two of them are, because I increasingly am now getting, you know, as a journalist, you get sent things which is very nice, and people will send them to you and say, oh, I suggest you actually decant it out of the can. So it still comes in a can, but they're still encouraging you to not drink it straight from there. You know, things like the freezer martini from people like White Box Drinks, which is amazing. I've got about 10 just waiting ready in my freezer, ready to go at any given time. And then I think that ready to serve, taking it even further. I mean, earlier this year for Burns Night, I did Canvas Bars, and they did a sort of Burns Night collaboration with Abbott, and it was amazing. You know, every cocktail had a video from a bartender making it at a bar, so you could see how to do it. There was a bespoke scent that you could spray the room with. There was a playlist, you know, personalized coasters, and it's, you know, I think there's that recognition that it's never going to be what you get in a bar, but you can still have that experience at home. And I think people are willing to pay for that experience as well. I think people are now looking at what they want to spend their money on. Something like that, they see a real value in it, and it has that kind of craft to it. It's got personality, and you kind of, a lot of them like to show you the bartenders behind these drinks, and I think it's great for the bar industry as well. It gives these people a face to people who might never get a chance to visit their bar. So yeah, it's a really exciting time, and it's definitely not going anywhere anytime soon.
Just jumping back in there just quickly, yeah, you make there's a great point from the bartender point of view, and I guess there's actually where a lot of these more ready to serve things came from, was the bars were closed, so people were making these cocktails. I think Bramble Bar would be a very was one of the best ones
Mm.
I tried. They were selling through Mothership, and they had some, and I was, you know, buying various bottles of their different things. And also those freezer martinis are great. There's also one, if you go with one very quickly, let me show you these. We're starting to see this sort of thing as well, which are these sort of little pouches that you can get, which is kind of, you know, they can come in the post. And this is a friend of ours, Steph DiCamillo's one that she's doing, but she does the whole range, and she's making them and she's sealing them, and then they'll go through your letterbox, and that's another way of kind of this RTS kind of style of thing. So
yeah, really cool.
Awesome, fantastic, thank you so much. And moving on, we're going to now look, kind of brings it on quite nicely actually, back to the bars. So people are going back to the bars, which I'm sure we're all really happy about. I've had some wonderful times in bars recently. But something I wanted to touch on was there was this wonderful rise of home bartending during lockdown. People started becoming particularly interested in making their own drinks at home. And I'm curious as to your thoughts. I know we don't know exactly what way it's going to go, but how much do you think that's going to stop? I can't help but think some people will retain that. There's a love there now. But I don't know how much, you know, I'd like to talk about that really. So Neil, if you could start us off.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating to spend any amount of time at home and consider what you're drinking. I mean, we've all had more time to do that than ever. And I think one of the things I found most enlightening over the last 2 years is how people are willing to explore and grow their drinks cabinet, really with this kind of amazing gay abandon. You know, it's fantastic, really. And it's about the sort of spirits, the quality of spirits that people are drinking. So, you know, you could initially look at the start of the lockdown and people just wanted to get pissed, right? You know, it was fine on genuinely whatever they could get their hands on. And then I think you started to see this more, not connoisseurship, but just a curiousness growing. And then it was legitimate to sort of have a cocktail hour in at 5 till 6, you know, after work. And, you know, when you were doing your Zoom calls or whatever. And I think it gave rise to this wonderful idea of, it sort of demystified making drinks. You know, you have permission to play. You've got this idea that actually, you know, you can make a Negroni very simply, and you can keep trying different gins or different, you know, add different ingredients to it, tailor make these things for your own preference. And so I think this idea of the home bartender has become a really powerful thing, not to sort of throw shade on a wonderful on-trade and the skills there, but I think what it's done is they both go hand in hand. And I mean, I've got a book coming out later this year. It'd be rude of me not to plug that, really, wouldn't it? Which is all about this, called 60-second cocktails. And it's this idea that you can make great drinks in under a minute. You know, there's nothing to stop you with a little bit of preparation. And the idea of putting fewer, simpler things together, but exploring that at your leisure, I think is great. But what that's done, conversely, is it's made us really appreciate the art of the bartender and everything that goes along with that. I mean, there is no substitute to going and having a wonderful martini made at your favorite bar, or, you know, a great old fashioned. You know, that's the sort of place where you want to spend time and money watching a craftsman at work. You know, you can make an old fashioned in under a minute at home, no problem. But you want to see someone spending 5 minutes stirring that down in a great bar, because it's about the experience. And that's really the thing. We go to a bar for a welcome. We go there for that experience, not just the drink. You know, you can have a great drink at home, but that's now what we're getting back to, is this wonderful exploration and appreciation of the experience.
Awesome. Yeah, that you're right. It does work hand in hand, because if people have more appreciation of the art at home, if they've been practicing it, when they see somebody who has like 20, 30 years experience under their belt, they're going to appreciate that maybe more than somebody who doesn't quite have that understanding. Brilliant. So moving on to you, Billy, I know you wanted to add to this.
Yeah, well, with the whole sort of lockdown thing, the way I've described a lot of the trends has not been necessarily, they're not new things, but it accelerated a lot of things that were happening already. And one of the things that I've worked on quite a lot over the past few years is creating ways through the Whisky Exchange website and, you know, talking to people, of explaining to people how they can make cocktails at home, and how, you know, on the retail side, easy ways of them getting the ingredients they need in packs and things like that. And when the pandemic hit, through our on-trade sort of connections of specialty drinks, which is the Whisky Exchange's trade side of things, we worked with bars to create cocktail packs, which they then got cuts of, so they could make their cocktails at home. And so we saw that, and from there's a lot of bottled cocktails and things. So the RTS stuff we spoke about beforehand, and so a lot of those sort of things help kickstart it, as well as people just saying, I can't go down bar down the end of the road. I think that acceleration of people doing more cocktails at home, was going to happen anyway, just not quite as quickly as we have got to now. Everybody had to, so you do what you need to make yourself get a decent Negroni. I think we're going to see it continue, but I don't think we'll see folks going quite to the extent they have done so far. When you can't get fancy drinks at all, that's when you go and find yourself a blender and start doing interesting things. But when you can just nip down the road to a bar where they'll do you something weird and wonderful, we are very much, I think, as Neil was saying, appreciated in the first sort of few months of lockdown. I really would like a nice drink. I have to make it myself. Oh, bars are actually good for a thing. Bartenders are quite good at stuff, aren't they? This is hard. And so I think it's, as you say, an appreciation there. So I think we are seeing, and we'll continue to see, people making great cocktails at home and seeking out good ingredients and understanding that. One of my favorite things I've seen, especially, I do a lot of work in the whiskey world, and speak to the average Facebook whiskey drinker and say to them cocktail, and they're like, oh, well, of course, use the cheap whiskey for that. It'd be awful to use anything good in a cocktail. And a realization by many people, in that sort of grumpy world, that actually you can make great drinks, and drinks are, all the components are ingredients. You have to have the right flavors. A cheap, blend may be great for making a drink. It may not have the right flavors in there. You might need to find something more expensive to make the drinks you want. And an understanding of flavor and quality has been an interesting side effect of all the fun and games of the past few years, which
I think it's really fascinating, that, Billy, actually. But you're absolutely right to see the appreciation of Scotch, particularly, and this idea of, no, you must never do anything with this in the cocktail world. And then people throwing in sort of Glendronach 18 into a Manhattan or Rob Roy or something, just because they feel liberated to do that. It's an enlightening moment, isn't it? I'm all for that.
Yeah, bartenders may be really good at things, but at the same time, you're allowed to have a go as well. There's so many barriers to entry in people's minds about everything. I speak to my stepdad about computers and him trying to fix his computer. And one day I said to him, you're not going to break it. You can probably just have a go. Unfortunately, means I've got a lot more phone calls now of him saying, well, I have actually broken it. But with drinks, it's that point where you say, I've just got a load of stuff on the side. What happens if I put these two things together? It's not going to explode. It's not going to make my face melt. It may not taste particularly great, but oh no, I've wasted a tiny bit of it, And that exploration, I think we'll see a lot more going forward. But I think, there's definitely acceptance of the fact of there's a limitation of what you can do at home without a huge back bar of stuff. Unfortunately, from speaking to various people, there are lots of people who now have a gigantic back bar of stuff they didn't beforehand. So
I've noticed, I've been watching actually with eagerness the growth of rum being made in the UK in the last few years. So this isn't just blending, this is distillation as well. And to note, I would like to mention the Portsmouth distillery, who have their first 3-year aged rum that they've distilled and aged here. It's being released in May, so that's just next month. So that's quite an exciting time for them. Just to talk about rum, Millie, can we come to you on that one?
Yeah, sure, of course. Kind of like you, I've been seeing these exciting UK distilleries launching rums, and I was at the rum show last year, and just looking around the room, I think it was pretty much a 50-50 split between, where you would traditionally know that rum is made versus, Scotland, England, which was really exciting. And actually, I think I was reading last week, there's a distillery called Matuga Distillers. They're up in Scotland, and I think they set out a crowdfunding sort of target of 300 grand, and they've already reached their target and more in 2 weeks. So I think that just shows you where that appetite is. And I think it comes back to what sort of Neil was saying about that locality. I think, especially when I look around my group of friends, to maybe put in front of them a big wall of rum and say, right, choose a rum, I think they'd be completely intimidated by that option unless they were handheld by someone, wonderful workers at the Whisky Exchange, for example. But I think if they have that point of difference where you can say, oh, this was made down the road or this was local, I think these UK rums are going to be a really nice entry point for newcomers to rum. I think it just kind of gives them that sense of connection that maybe they wouldn't have if they hadn't been to, you know, the Caribbean or something like that. And I think it's also worth noting that, you know, I was talking to people within the industry. I'm actually on a panel next week about rum and sort of desert island rums, and everyone on that panel chose your traditional rums. I think there might be a little bit more of a split within the kind of rum part of the industry, and I think those conversations are going to be really interesting over the next couple of years. But from a consumer point of view, I think UK rum is a fantastic opportunity for the rum category to grow more than it is. And, you know, Christ, I think we've been saying for, well, I have at least for the last 5 years, rum's the next big thing. It kind of hasn't been, but I think maybe these UK rum distilleries could be part of the way to getting it to where it needs to be here in the UK. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what comes out, and hopefully there's some really good liquids in store for us in the next few years.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, no, I totally agree. It was something I picked up on, because with the start of gin, a lot of that were gins attached to like a locality, which meant somebody could connect to a place via something that was being used. And then with that, you have this idea that you can never have too many, because each one's doing its own particular thing. And I mean, with rum now, I won't talk about botanical rums too much, but you know, you're starting to see UK rum producers putting like a local botanical in there as well, and really pulling in on that local identity. So it's got that potential to be that gateway for so many. So, you know, I totally agree with you. Billy, I think you wanted to add to this as well.
Yeah, it's a weird one, because in a lot of spirits categories, there's a sort of barrier to entry of the drinkers don't want things from weird countries. You know, the UK is not a place where you go sugar cane. It's not really the most natural place to make rum. It's actually an absolute, you know, get all the raw materials to where you need them to be and everything like that, which is actually in a lot of the rum producing countries as well these days, because, you know, sugar production doesn't happen necessarily in the same places as rum these days, used to. So people don't necessarily see that from the consumer side of things. So there's been a little bit of a barrier to entry, and people being a bit sniffy about the idea of, you know, a British rum, a Scottish rum. That's ridiculous. You know, the fact that there is actually history of sugar processing in Scotland and all that sort of thing doesn't necessarily mean anything. And but as people are, again, it's that permission to play around, that permission that, you know, seems to be implicitly given to, we can't go out and do things, therefore we're going to look into what we have locally, what we can play with locally. It's really helped producers, you know, start up and have a go. You know, that people have actually felt they're able to do these things. And the important thing after that is that they've been making really good stuff. The spirits that, you know, we see coming out of a lot of these small British rum producers are really good. You know, the guys at Matuga, they started off contract distilling, with them, you know, while they were learning their art sort of thing and sort of getting sort of like funds together, they opened up their own distillery. And I remember at the virtual rum fest a couple of years back, a tour in which the guy running the distillery said, I can't actually see if any of you guys are, you know, there, but anyway, I'll do you a tour anyway. Just took his laptop around and showed us all these little stills that he'd set up and told us about, and it was just somebody doing stuff for the joy of it, and because they really, you know, loved rum and wanted to do something with that in Scotland. You know, and the Whisky Exchange, we've always been big fans of rum, and if anybody's spoken to Dawn Davis, our head buyer, about rum, you will understand the ferocious love she has for rum. It's quite a scary thing. We've done a lot of work trying to demystify rum, because, yeah, we've always said it is the next big thing. It's just, we need to just give it the scaffolding around it to help people understand it and not be confused by it. Because it's when people come saying rum doesn't have rules, rum has a lot of rules, because rum is a different thing in every single country of the world. It's not one thing, it's those things. And so now we see things like, you know, Scottish rum becoming a big thing. And so our rising star of the year, our first time we do whiskey, sparkling wines and gins and other things of the year, but this year we've done a rising star. We chose Sugar House from Glasgow, and I visited a little while back, and it is fantastic and to see this tiny little distillery where they've been making gin and vodka previously, now making incredible characterful white rum. You know, not sort of like, you know, your sort of simple cane vodka type situation you see other places, but you now, which is fine, does what it does, but people are actually trying to create interesting characterful spirits everywhere from, you know, up in Scotland all the way down, you know, to the other end of the country. And so yeah, I see it being a thing that we'll see more and more of, especially as we now have folks coming online with aged products as well, as you were saying, Millie.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen a few of them over the years, and they sort of popped up little by little bit as they get older and older. We're now hitting that sweet spot of this is now old enough to start competing with other places that aren't quite so cool and rainy as it is here.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I was going to touch on that. So obviously, you know, it needs to be acknowledged that there is a difference in aging because of the climate. So you do get different results. And I think, you know, when you're encouraging people to try these things, it's also important to acknowledge it's not a head to head. Nobody's saying one's better than the other. There are some incredible rums all over the world. They're amazing. I'm really into rum at the moment. So it's not saying UK rum is anything better or something you have to choose. It gives you more option of what you can have, and it gives you a whole different wealth of flavors and profiles and things to explore, especially with people using sort of local botanicals as well. So it's a really, really interesting time.
I think interesting with this, there was, sorry to interrupt, there was a time where we had this a little bit with English whiskey, or I mean, it could be Taiwanese whiskey with Kavalan, or anywhere which wasn't historically perceived as a sort of whiskey producing nation. And you know, critics were very, very sniffy about these, you know, this sort of intentions of these distillers. What, you know, why are they doing this? Is it going to be any good? You know, and I think distilling, but as we know, it's not an overnight thing. This, you don't just suddenly set a distillery up and hope for the best that you're going to have something in a week's time. It's a long game, this, that people are playing, and they're investing in it in enormous sums of money, and the products themselves take years and years to get better and to hone that sort of craft. And so, you know, I applaud anyone who's going into this now, you know, with this sort of long-term plan, because it will change. Opinions will change and attitudes are changing towards this. And I think with rum, it's quite hard because, as Billy said, the UK is not well known for its sugar production. I think with rum, you do have this sort of immediate imagery of the Caribbean being the base of where this is from. And it's quite difficult to change people's mindsets there, but the liquid will do that. If it's good enough, you know, you're going to have this sort of light bulb moment like we had in whiskey, probably over nearly 15 years ago with Kavalan, and on a blind tasting on Burns night against all these scotches. And then Kavalan from Taiwan suddenly beats them all. And it's like, what? Where did this come from? And suddenly the ball started rolling then for the category. So yeah, I think it's going to emerge really quickly, that.
Yeah, and I think some of these like new brands as well are coming at the sort of rum category with that eye on education as well. I know the guys at Matuga, they do a kind of more entry level, I think it's called Live Rum, for kind of people getting just into the category, and then they have a more premium level. And I think, you know, the advantage of these new companies coming through is that educating the consumer is part of, you know, it's part of their company ethos. And, you know, as a spirits writer and communicator, I sort of bang on about that every day. But, you know, some brands don't do that work, and that's not just in the rum category. And I think, you know, the advantage of having these new brands coming into the market is that they can start with that as part of their intention, and, you know, help do some of that heavy lifting with the consumer as well. So, yeah, very exciting.
One final thing I sort of find interesting is that we're talking about this now, and we're only really talking about it in the last sort of like, you know, year or so. But 2 years ago, there was, you know, at the beginning of lockdown, there was a virtual, you know, British rum festival where they sent out this huge box of rums for 2 different sessions, sort of thing. And I sort of hung around all day for it and sort of like popped into various different talks. There were enough producers to do an online festival at the beginning of lockdown. They've been out there for a while. It's just that people haven't necessarily realized they're there. But now it's very much, and this is, you know, the time to start talking about it. We've hit a critical mass of, it's now really interesting, and people, it's the time for it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. Okay, now moving on to, I did want to touch on gin. I know on my side for sure, I'm thankfully starting to see a lot less of these sweet shop style gins about nowadays, which does please me greatly, I have to say. It does seem that people are turning more to fruit for the flavoured gins, especially in, you know, the big producers like Gordon's. They've been bringing out a lot of fruit products recently, Beefeater as well. So we do seem to be seeing a steer towards that. David, I know you'd like to talk a bit about gin as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make good points there, Bernie. And of course, you know, you're a gin commentator in your own right, but you're very graciously hosting us today. But yeah, you're quite right. I think we're not seeing so much of this bubblegum or jam roly-poly flavored stuff, or in the instances when we are, there might still be odd or more unusual flavors, but it's done in a really in a very good way, like with the proper ingredients. Actually tastes like it's not just an essence added quick job, like someone's really thought about the best way of maybe actually getting different ways of getting that flavor in from different directions. Seeing a lot of marine and coastal gins, apologies everybody, as well as salt gins. I think a few people say salt gins, maybe I can see that coming out. That's been the case in Italy for about 2 or 3 years. We're starting to see that coming over. Certainly getting some gins, and particularly if you've got it blind and you go to nose it and you go, oh, and it's very, very fishy, and then you go, oh, actually it's an oyster gin, or it's I think someone was telling me about a gin which was basically just juniper and anchovies. I think there was another Italian one. So I'm interested to see how we go with these sorts of things. Perhaps in a more mainstream way, citrus continues to be popular with gin. I mean, who knew? But you know, you see, we had the excellent Haymans with their exotic citrus came out last year, but they were pushing the boundaries a little bit with citrus. You've got Beefeaters, their lemon ones come out, and there's the Bombay Sapphire Mediterranean lemon, I think is imminent. I think we might see citrus, but maybe moving beyond the standard kind of lemon, maybe lime kind of flavors, maybe moving into some more exotic citruses as a focus, particularly when you go into the other trend, which is kind of gins from non-typical or not traditional gin producing countries, or not considered to be traditional gin producing, I would say. I mean, Australian gin continues to grow, and they've got lots of interesting citrus fruit. Chinese gin, I know there's a lot of very interesting things going on there, and South America. I think these are kind of 3 areas very much to watch, and their growth is really, I mean, and some of the quality of the stuff coming out of Brazil and Argentina and China and of course Australia is phenomenal and goes toe to toe with the best stuff that's made in the UK, I would say. It really is that. So it's not just novelty, there's quality as well, which is quite exciting.
Absolutely. I think as well for consumers, just to add 2 cents before we move on, sorry, I can't help it. I think for consumers, it's that idea. It's very easy to buy a gin in the UK thinking it's got this local idea and it's used the local botanical. But I think sometimes when people try gins from further afield, they get very confused because it doesn't quite fit into what they're expecting the spirit to be. Yeah. And you kind of need to embrace the idea on a bigger scale. It's like you've got the opportunity to taste so many things from somewhere else, and like these different ideas of production, how to do things, because they don't necessarily have to fit in with regulations that and it's just such an incredible opportunity to experience these different places. So I really do think people should just go that bit further afield and start trying gins from different countries, because it's absolutely amazing. Moving on quickly, because we wanted to leave you guys a bit of time to talk about whiskey, and I know we're getting a bit tight here, so I'm going to throw whiskey to the floor. Who would like to start?
Cast it onto the floor.
Yeah, Neil,
get down. I mean, I think the whiskies it's always great to return to, isn't it? Because it feels like it's gone through so many amazing sort of no real troughs. It's mostly peaks, isn't it, with whiskey every time? And I look at different trends or things coming out, and all said and done, it's still the spirit I probably go back to the most, above and beyond anything else. And there isn't that much innovation as such from a flavour perspective. But I think what we're now seeing is innovation within innovation. So, I mean, the other day I was writing about something. It was an Ardbeg that's just come out, or in fact 2 actually. One that came out yesterday where they buried 2 casks under the peat bogs just to see what would happen, and it was sort of maturing there for 3 years or just under 3 years. And you start to see all these sort of influences of the land on the spirit. And the same way with another Ardbeg, you have this use of toasted malt, which Glenmorangie have done extensively with one of their releases, which, you know, it tastes amazing. It's a sort of mocha and chocolatey coffee note, which goes brilliantly with whiskey, as we know. But then to do that in Ardbeg, a smoky whiskey, it's just another layer of complexity. So I know everybody moans about whiskey being difficult, or Scotch particularly being difficult to innovate or play around with, but I don't think it is. I mean, you know, there's a new what's that distillery that did an Armagnac cask quite recently?
Gallici?
Yes, yeah, and a great big flavored spirit there, and then, you know, putting it in Armagnac, it draws out all these different aspects to it. I've really fallen back in love with whiskey, it must be said. I went through a period of drinking almost endless gins, and then white rums particularly, but whiskey I'm really back on track with again, because I think it never really loses its place in your cabinet, and especially with some of the new ones, some of the ryes coming through, some of the English whiskies as well. The White Peak in Derbyshire, brand new whiskey, 3 years old, and I mean, it's drinking incredibly well. You know, really excellent for an inaugural release. It was totally blew my socks off. So I'm some great stuff happening at the moment.
Amazing. I don't know if it's worth mentioning now as well, David, but is it today you're recording the English whiskey?
Well, there will also be, we'll be partnered with Exploring English Whiskey, so there will be a discussion that will just be all on sort of the rise in English whiskey, and I know that there's some suggestions of having their own sort of association, and quite exciting. That's definitely, I mean, it's been a slow burn, English whiskey, I would say, and you know, there's great other whiskies being made in lots of other places in the world, and within the UK, which, you know, in Wales and in Northern Ireland, and they definitely deserve a mention as well. But that certainly that English whiskey is gradually seems to be building. And again, when people can visit the distillery where the thing is made, I think that gives the connection, and I think that's exactly what Bernie was saying about the rum, and that's why gin was very popular. I'm intrigued as to what direction they think some of these new distilleries will go in, because there's some distilleries where the whiskies that are coming out are 90 quid plus. You know, there's that kind of model, and then there's others, whereas somewhere like Cotswolds, and now actually gradually they've got that price down to sort of sub 40. I mean, as the panel, do you think that you know, that is that sustainable to have these occasional releases at this higher price point, or at some point do you have to have a more mainstream offering?
It's a very good question. I think it's quite difficult for new distilleries to do anything other than release things that are in the super premium bracket, without doubt. I do think that there is a limited amount of shelf space and I think budget from a lot of people. So especially if you're asked to invest in, you know, a 3-year-old or a no age statement product from a distillery that doesn't have any real provenance or heritage or reputation, other than the maybe new reputation that people are writing about, it's quite a challenge to get that over the line. But then I think if people do manage to do that, it just sets the benchmark out that what they're making is of good quality enough to convince people to spend what is quite a sum of money. You know, if we're talking, you know, 90, 100 pounds on a brand new whiskey, you know, that's a lot of money to spend to turn out and not enjoy that. You know, that's not something you can justify. So I think Cotswold is a very good example, David, actually, of a company that set the benchmark out really well, had a long-term plan, and have been able to build the volumes up with what they're doing. I mean, that's now in supermarkets. You know, you would say that's an emerging mainstream whiskey in the category. And what it's done is it's allowed them to become a much broader platform for other brands, you know, in many respects, to come and benchmark themselves against. And if you can put a brand new whiskey out for under 50 quid, I think that's an outstanding piece of business, that, because it's bloody expensive making whiskey, as we know. You know, you can't just turn the tap on it. It takes time and patience, and the raw materials, and now the logistics adding in that. You know, everybody's affected by that, of course, but then to get casks, to get materials, to get things shipped around, you know, you're adding on a huge amount of extra expense, which unfortunately has to get passed on to the consumer. So it's you know, it's a very difficult economic decision to make that.
Yeah, I was just up in Bunnahabhain and got back at about 1:30 in the morning yesterday. And yeah, I was talking to Julianne there, who's the master blender. And she was talking about how for her, consistency of that core product and of the liquid is the most important thing for her. And I think that becomes to be this tipping point when you start churning out, you know, too many limited releases and things like that, that quality inevitably will end up slipping. And, you know, they also have to think about what they're laying down now for sort of 30, 40 years time. You know, inventory is, you know, it's a pretty clinical and boring thing to maybe think about, but the you know, the real life ramifications of throwing, you know, your precious liquid in casks and, you know, losing that volume or not having that inventory for the future is, you know, from a business point of view, it's you know, really serious implications for what the future of that brand could look like. And you know, if you've got new people coming into your brand or new people coming into whiskey, I think that consistency is, as she was saying, to make sure that that core product is as high quality as it can be is so important. And I think for the consumer now, I think people probably are willing to spend more money on something, but that proposition of spending, I think, over something like 55, 60 pounds for something they've never tasted before is it's still a big sell. So I think that does become a tipping point, and not just from a customer point of view, but from the distillery point of view as well. I think talking to them, and not just about Bunnahabhain, but you know, the other distilleries they have as well, there's definitely a kind of stepping back at the moment and looking at, right, let's just make sure that what we've got as our core is consistent and we're doing a good job of it and making sure the quality's up there. And then let's think about, you know, what else we release on top of it as well. So yeah, it's interesting question, David. Hadn't really thought about that. So yeah, see what happens.
Sorry to jump away from your question, David. I just want to pick up something that Neil said right at the beginning, which irked me. Neil, you said
another yes.
Yeah. One of the big list of things. Yeah. No. But it was, you said there's not really any innovation in flavour, and that annoyed me because at the moment that's the thing which I'm seeing most of all in whiskey. You know, if you look outside of somewhere like immediately just outside of Scotland, and America and Japan, which is now a traditional whiskey producing country, you know, next year is their 100th anniversary, so yeah, they're now one of the old boys. If you go to somewhere, well, if you look at some, you know, another oil producing country, Canada, there's a load of stuff that's appearing in Canada at the moment, which you try it, you wouldn't necessarily consider to be whiskey just from flavour alone. People are pushing the boundaries of what you can get from a grain. If you look at the whiskies being produced across Europe, where people are, you know, coming from a fruit spirits tradition and are creating something that's very, very different to a traditional grain sort of flavor in their new spirit, which is then being tweaked further with the sort of way they use casks. If you look at the stuff down in Australia, all over the place, people are looking to how do we make things which are not traditional whiskies? Because for years and years, if you were making whiskey, you had to make traditional whiskey, otherwise people wouldn't buy it. But that thing we are getting now is that people are more adventurous. People are, you know, willing to spend a little bit of money on something which one of the things I spend a large amount of time doing is explaining to people the concept of economies of scale. When someone sits there and says, I could buy a bottle of Johnny Walker for 15 quid in the shop. Why is this whiskey 70 pounds? It's like, well, okay, let's start at the beginning. You know, money is something you can be exchanged for goods and services, you know, and it's properly, you know, because people don't think of it in that way when it comes to food and drink quite a lot of the time, especially in the drinks world. And so explaining how these things are different, how they sort of change is a big challenge, especially if you're a retailer who just has this much text on a website to explain why someone should you know, massively up their budget. But on the flavor front, that's the place which I'm really excited for whiskey at the moment, because people are feeling that permission. We're sort of saying all the way through there's permission to do new things is a thing which has popped up as a sort of little bit of a thread. And in the whiskey world, it has to have been around for a while, because whiskey takes a little while to come to fruition. But we're seeing people do interesting stuff with grain, interesting stuff with casks, interesting stuff with process, all the way through to try and create these new flavors. There is still, the vast majority is traditional whiskey, and I don't want that to change because I really quite like whiskey. It's nice. you know, I don't want that to go away. But there are people pushing at the edges, and that's now informing the more traditional whiskies as well. So I'm obsessed with the feedback loops within whiskey of, over, you know, look at the entirety of the history of the spirit. People have always sort of learned from each other around the world and taken the ideas, and they've, you know, someone else has taken something, run with it, improved it, someone else has then taken that and changed it again. And at the moment, I think we're in a place where we are seeing a lot more weird flavored things coming through, for good and for ill. Some of the stuff I try from Canada has been absolutely terrible, but at the same time, there are other things which pop up which are incredible and really sort of show people unafraid to push the boundaries. So yeah, that's the thing I sort of see definitely coming more and more, is those releases of things that people have buried under a bog, things that people have left fermenting too long, to just use Ardbeg as an example. You know, it's lots of interesting things in there which are trying to push us beyond just the norm.
Yeah, I kind of like to just pick up on that point you made, Billy, about the process as well. And I think what I'm most excited about, anyone who knows me knows that I, you know, love talking about new make, and if I go to a distillery, I always want to try it, because I think it's such an important part of the process of understanding, you know, a whiskey and its core DNA. And I think that process thing, you know, the word innovation irks me, because, you know, people call everything innovative these days, and, you know, everything isn't innovative by, you know, definition. But I think where this maybe more experimentation is probably the right word, is happening maybe not in the end of the process in cask and things, that whatever the distillers and blenders are putting the liquid in, but what's happening at that decision point at the beginning. You know, like Neil was mentioning, rye whiskey, and, you know, Oxford Artisan Distillery launching theirs, you know, that's taking it straight back to the raw ingredient and the raw material. People playing around with different yeast strains in their new make spirit. You know, the guys again at White Peak Distillery with their Wireworks launch. I went up for the day and spent the day with them, and they'd bottled their new make, and they were talking about the experiments they've been doing with their new make and how they're kind of recording that and how they're changing it. And, you know, the guys at Filey Bay as well, they make 2 different new makes. And it's this experimentation that's happening at that beginning of the process, where I think for so long, we've always, as a consumer, the point of difference is the cask, the point of difference is the age. But I think that beginning of the process now is where people are really starting to show a bit of an interest. And I think that also plays into the bigger conversation around sustainability, and, you know, how much of that raw ingredient we can get, what yeast strains are more efficient than more traditional ones, and how is that going to affect the flavour of the resulting whiskey as well. So yeah, I think for me, that is always, you know, it's probably not the most glamorous or romantic part when you're talking about yeast compared to talking about, you know, beautiful Armagnac casks. But for me, that's kind of where, you know, it's where it all begins, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's really exciting at the moment. And yeah, I won't talk about new make anymore because I could talk about it for hours. But yeah, it's amazing.
No, go for it. No.
Can I jump in, actually?
Yes, please.
I know you mentioned yeast, but I spent over an hour talking about corn yesterday with Gary at Woodhat Distillery in the US. So he grows his own corn, and he's bringing back old types of corn, and he's gone right back to the point, you know, the sort of breeds there would be before the Europeans were in the US. And obviously very similar to Oxford Artisan Distillery, they're working with John Letts. I'm writing a piece on this at the moment, which is why I'm very, very interested. So it's all about going back to these older type grains, because they've been bred over the years based on the starch production and the yield, whereas, you know, through that they've lost so much flavour. And Gary kindly sent me a couple of samples of his stuff, and it is just off the chart. Like, the flavour you get is just unreal. And Oxford, I mean, David, you came with me, didn't you, to Oxford Artisan Distillery? Their stuff is just amazing. But yeah, the focus on those base ingredients is like so important. And as well as the new stuff, the innovation going forward, we're also seeing this looking backwards, you know, and going back to those details. And Gary, he's a fascinating man. He's basically hybriding from the start to create a seed bank based on flavour and what the flavour will be. And he's planting a field of corn of the different strains, which you should probably go to, Millie, because at the end of each one, he's doing the new make spirit of each type. So you can see the different corns and how they are, and then you can taste the new make at the end. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's so overlooked. And yeah, we were talking about it yesterday at the distillery, and the Bunnahabhain new make is incredible. It's like raspberries, strawberries and cream, and it's just so interesting. And I often think that step is so often missed when it comes to thinking about whiskey. And yeah, I think we're seeing more and more people bottling it as well, because they want to give the consumer that journey through the spirit, and that understanding of, you know, when you buy something in a shop, you know, food, or if you buy something at a restaurant, usually it says, you know, where the steak's from, and, you know, what is it, the ingredients. And I think you always miss that a little bit with whiskey. Like, you know, you understand, you probably know it's a single malt, you know, it's, you know, malted barley, but for the consumer, I think that is sometimes just skipped over. And it's like, you know, these incredible ingredients can be played around with in so many different ways to create these flavors, which is what this is the backbone of the whiskey that you're drinking. And yeah, I think that is a really exciting part of the industry right now. So yeah, and things yeah.
What's great is, sorry, I interrupted you. I think what's great, and Millie, you're absolutely right. I think it's this idea of we're learning to appreciate raw materials more than ever, and when they're local and when there's a sustainability to. It's, in a way, we're learning from the kitchen, aren't we? And, you know, we've seen this for 10 years with what makes a great meal, you know, and chefs have been obsessing over this for a long time. And I'm really glad now that this has sort of transcended its way into the spirits that we're drinking, and actually the bartending as well. People are, you know, at the restaurant bars, for instance, people are obsessed with origins of these products. I went out for lunch the other day with Mark Rainier, who is obviously a long time ago was at Brooklady, now does Waterford Distillery, and we had a couple of his new releases, and they're significantly different from each other, and that's all down to the yield, to the barley type, the soil, the farm, you know. And I was never a big, I always thought this idea of terroir in spirits was a good story, but it never really manifested itself in the glass as well as I've seen it doing at the moment. So I think people have really got this right, and they're starting to do it in a better fashion than they ever have, because the results are right there. And you know, Millie was saying about the new make, it's right there in front of you, isn't it? I mean, that's the thing. And it's the DNA of what that then informs into these mature whiskies, which is fantastic. You know, the next 10 years in making whiskey, I think it's probably going to be you would call this the golden era of whiskey making. All over the world, you know, from what's coming. So
it's definitely what you're seeing from the new distilleries, this trend for more flavoursome new make spirit. And I wonder if partly that's come from a lot of distillers are coming from a brewing background. And of course, if you're a brewer, you're going to, I mean, I know Isle of Wight Distillery, so Zav, who's making whiskey there, he's a brewer background. You can taste the whiskey and you can tell, because you can taste so much more of that, of the character of that initial distillation coming through, which I think is just beautiful, in the same way that you get it with brandies and eau de vies and all these other things. Sure. You're also getting it with whiskey. And I guess you've got to differentiate, right? You've got to do something different that's not the same of these distilleries with the economies of scale. So why not?
Yeah, things like grain whiskies as well, you know, that's something that I think people are really like single grain, or Compass Box just released an experimental grain whiskey, and, you know, it's absolutely bonkers. I tasted it the other day. It's really interesting. And yeah, I think that's really exciting as well. And I think pretty much now most distilleries I go to, people are always getting really excited about sort of single grain whiskies, and yeah, I think that's really exciting. It's a point of difference. And yeah, I think I had something the other day which was using champagne yeast, and that had an incredible, not just an effect on the flavour, but on the texture of the whiskey as well. And I think that textural element is starting to play a bit of a part as well. People leaning a bit more towards kind of like oilier whiskies and having a bit more of that body, maybe not that kind of necessarily the richness that you always get from sort of being in cask for a very long time, but, you know, that point of difference of that texture is something that I get really excited about now as well. So yeah, it's the differences and the changes you can make are kind of endless at the moment. And I think going back to English whiskey and what you were saying, David, about there's all this discussion going on at the moment about the GI, and I think that is going to be a real turning point for English whiskey as well, because I think we'll just see a bit more confidence in that part of the industry, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that, actually, because I think there's going to be a few sort of loggerheads as well. So yeah, it's exciting. Always a bit of controversy, gets me excited. So yeah, can't wait.
Just one sort of final thing on that things between there is that thing we shouldn't forget is that whiskey isn't immediate. So this is just the end of long discussions. You know, every single thing we talked about, none of this is new. We've been talking about this in, you know, behind the scenes in the whiskey world for years, decades in some cases. You know, every year there's a bunch of geeks who sit down somewhere. You know, Neil, you and I have done this in the past. I sat there in the, you know, back in the days when, you know, you pretty much have focused the entire career on whiskey. Back then even we were talking yeast. This year is going to be the year that yeast is important, and that people actually want to talk about yeast, the most unsexy part of the sludgy whiskey process. You know,
and look, everyone's with us now, Billy. Look,
we were ahead of the game, mate. Yeah,
It's
that's the whole thing. Is that all the way through, and this is the thing. You know, for distillers out there, you know, well done for keeping on trying these things, experimenting things, you know, swapping ideas, and this has been just quietly building. And it's as what you were saying, Millie, was like the consumer. This is the year the consumer is now starting to finally care about this stuff that distillers have been caring about for years. So distillers behind the scenes have been tweaking these things, playing with them. And it's always the way in the whiskey world, because of that delay of, you know, in the EU, minimum 3 years, often a lot longer. It's only when we sort of get to the end that somebody says, does the consumer care about this now? No, they don't. We'll just keep it quiet. You know, my classic example of that is the concept of finishing whiskey. You know, this whole idea of moving things between casks. That used to be called good cellar management. That's literally that's how you managed your warehouse. You move stuff around, and then all of a sudden, you got to a point where consumers cared enough about what was happening behind the scenes that became a thing. And that's what we're seeing now. Is with all these things, the cool things with yeast, the cool things with casks, because there are still a few cool things left to do with casks. Not very many, but yeah, we've done most of them now, I think. But process, playing around with everything at that beginning stage before you start studying, all the way through the process of making whiskey. All these things distillers care about and have been talking about and swapping ideas about for years. We've got to a point now, we've laid the groundwork. The consumers are now going, yes, I will let you tell me about that. And, you know, I will now be interested, and I will then use these USPs as things I do actually care about, outside of just a few geeks sitting around in, you know, in a whiskey bar somewhere, into the mainstream. And that's the thing I'm really looking forward to, is people actually being able to say, oh yeah, we did a cool thing, and people actually caring about it as well.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, what a lovely note to end it on. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolutely amazing conversation, thoroughly enjoyable. Went on a bit longer than we intended, but no problem with that at all, because it's been wonderful, and hopefully people will enjoy watching it.